Hey, folks, welcome to the Generational Gap. I'm Robert, your resident Gen Xer. Right there next to me, that's John, our resident
Please go.
millennial. John, how you doing tonight?
Fantastic, especially now that I'm here with all of you fine people.
Oh, that's so sweet of you to
I
say.
know.
It's nauseating.
I didn't
I'm
mean
gonna.
it though. It's okay.
Can I get a little extension on my finger point? We've also got a special
Am I
guest
going
with
this
us.
way? Yeah.
Why would you go that way?
I don't know. I can't see where I'm at. I guess I'm going this way.
Right. Yeah. Lefty,
Yeah.
lefty, loosey, righty, tighty.
Give it a go, guys. Come on.
we're a professional show. I don't know
Yeah,
if you know.
yeah, duct
Yeah.
tape. So our guest tonight is Michael Autery. Is it Autery? How do you pronounce
Autry.
Autry?
Archery.
Now, see,
Yeah.
I was wondering because I remember Gene Autry. But
Yep.
he didn't
Wait,
have.
is that French by chance?
It is French, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, get him out of here. No, we
Yeah.
can't. We can't have this. No,
Sorry.
I did not know that. It's not fair.
Yeah. I'm not that, according to 23andMe, I'm not that French, but the name stuck somehow.
Right, right.
Generation after generation.
It wouldn't be French Canadian, though, would it? 'Cause
No.
that's the worst kind of French.
No Canadian.
Hey, that's not nice. I've got some French Canadian in me, and he knows it.
My
Yeah.
point stands, you know.
That's horrible. So, Michael, you have yourself a little something going on. You got yourself a little YouTube channel. You've got yourself some. I believe you just had an article. I'm going to put props out there. You just had something posted in the Federalist. Is that correct?
I did, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that was. I read that the about Obamacare being unconstitutional.
Yeah.
Yet the takes on it by the judge, I thought that was a very interesting, well thought out article. And
Thank you.
your channel on YouTube is called Unalienable, correct?
Yep.
And you tout yourself as a little bit of a constitutionalist. Is that correct?
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
that's kind of what you focus on for your show. But tell us a little bit more about you yourself and how you came to be where you're at today on YouTube, focused on the Constitution. What brought you to this point?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, John and Robert, for having me on your show.
Oh, our pleasure.
Appreciate the opportunity. So, before I answer that question, I'll give my little disclaimer I always got to give just to kind of cover my own ass, which is
Mhm.
that the views I express here are mine alone and don't necessarily represent the official policy or position of the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy, or the U.S. government. There. So now I'm clear.
Let the games
So,
begin.
yeah,
Yeah.
now let the curse words fly. No, I can't. But I am a naval officer. So, as of 2015, I commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy, and actually, in just a few days, I'm going to be a lieutenant. I'm getting promoted, so that'll be fun.
Oh,
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, thank you. '03 lieutenant. So 4 years ago, I commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Navy, and we all take an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And about a year and a half ago, I don't know, I just kind of watching what was going on in the world, and I think really what got me super pumped and motivated to start this was honestly the Parkland shooting last February and kind of what happened to our dialogue after that as a country. I mean, gun control has always been a contentious topic. It always has been, and people are rightfully animated on both sides. But something was different after that. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys felt it, but it was just different. Things were way worse, and I just felt like, what wasn't, what didn't seem to be getting a fair shake, and this seemed to be a common theme, was just the Constitution in general. And I realized that even though I take my oath seriously, as every man should, that I didn't even understand the Constitution that I was sworn to defend. I had never even read the whole thing, and that seemed to not sit right with me. Like when it occurred to me that I've taken this oath, which I'm, duty bound to possibly give my life for if need be, that, I don't even know this document that I've sworn to defend. So that was basically how it started for me. I decided I wanted to read and learn and like everything I could about the Constitution. Not just reading the document itself, but reading different theories about the meanings of different, clauses and all that, and trying to see what it's meant throughout history, what our founders thought, what the courts have said, all that kind of stuff. And I think every oath-bound public official should do that. If they swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution, then they should really understand that document. It seems hypocritical otherwise. So it was, I took that on myself, and I decided to kind of go through that journey and share it with people. And that's why I started the podcast. So I started it about a year ago, a little over, maybe like 13 months. I started the podcast, Unalienable. And I just go kind of topic by topic, whatever kind of strikes my fancy, or sometimes it's kind of reactionary to whatever's going on in the world. And sometimes it's more like, I've been meaning to cover this, so I just cover it, right? And it's usually pretty relevant to what's going on, but I'm trying to explore the meaning and history of the Constitution as it pertains to a particular issue. So like I started with, my very first topic I covered was free speech, so I talked a lot about all this stuff going on campuses. Again, this was last year, but we had all these different campus issues where people are being deplatformed and shouted down, and their kids are burning down their own school to keep people from talking. And it's like, what the hell is going on? So I felt like that was, really important. So I covered it first, and then I did guns. I've done the Supreme Court, as a whole episode just about the Supreme Court. And kind of almost all my episodes are pretty much, complaining in some way about the status quo, and saying what's wrong with it. There's not a lot of happy stories where I'm like, this is going perfectly fine, let's change nothing. We're doing exactly what the founders wanted us to do here. Not a lot of that going on. And the what do you call it? See, this is a great beauty of a live show. My God, General Welfare Clause. I had a whole episode about the General Welfare Clause and how that's been misinterpreted to grow the government to exponential size. Yeah.
Trust me, some questions are coming about that.
Right. So anyways, I've covered a bunch of stuff. I'm currently kind of redoing my gun stuff, but I'm putting a lot more effort into the video editing piece of it. And it wasn't, last time it was all audio. Now it's video. So very long answer to your short question is that I took it on myself to learn everything I can about the Constitution, and I'm just trying to share that with people and be as thorough and fair as possible, and trying to approach it from every angle. And I think I generally, for the most part, at the end of every episode, I'm going to piss off people on both sides. Though I will say I'm not just walking the fence. I do piss off the left a lot more than the right, I think. But
well, I'll give you props. I think one of the best ways that you can defend the Constitution is properly educate people on what the Constitution actually is and how it works. That's one of the best protections for it. Just real quick, shout out to Wyatt over there from Roundtable Decision in the chat. Good to see you tonight, Wyatt. And by the way, congratulations to Wyatt. He's graduated.
Nice.
He's an adult now. Get out there, get a job. Get
The
yourself
little
an
guy's all
apartment.
grown up.
Get to work. Start feeding the
get to
machine.
Start paying some taxes, boy.
So, Michael, just to cover some of the simple bases, I took a look at some of your offerings. Of course, I look at your Twitter, and I looked at YouTube and Facebook, and so you are a self-proclaimed. You openly admit that you're a ginger. This is something that you're comfortable with. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you go out in public.
And
you go out in public that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, if the sun's not too shiny, if there's clouds, then I can go out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're fine being soulless, right? I mean,
I've never needed it so far in life, so
that's fair.
fine.
Now,
To be fair, I don't think I've ever used mine, so yeah. I mean,
now it also says bodybuilder. Is that just purely amateur bodybuilder, or are you competitive at all?
I have competed once before at the amateur level, and I would like to compete again. So it's I'm half-assing it currently for sure. Like I'll still lift like a bodybuilder, but I'm not eating right. So in my defense, my wife is like 9 months pregnant right now, so that's an excuse for now.
Sympathy eating. It's a thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Well, John, you were considering getting back into competitive bodybuilding, weren't you?
And
Oh,
that
sorry.
was competitive eating.
Um, Now, one thing I will say, I wanted to point out, I will address that this is Memorial Day, and I feel
Yes.
very honored to have a member of the military here with us on Memorial Day. I believe that the meaning of Memorial Day. I also saw an article that you liked on Twitter that spoke to what we really how we really perceive the people that are standing up in the military and what they're protecting. And it was an article that about the American Empire. Dying for the empire is not heroic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I
it's
saw that.
and it's this very interesting take on it. So you see Memorial Day from a slightly different angle. Is that correct? And as far as our military is concerned, your take on that, and we'll be brief because I know you have to keep some of the things low key.
Well, that particular article or that meme, I think there may have been an article related. I just saw a meme, and the meme was it said something like dying for the empire is not heroic. Uh, Resisting the empire is heroic. And I like put a link to that in a new tweet, but in my tweet, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think obviously the way they word that makes it sound bad, but
Right.
no, my actual tweet. In fact, I think it might be worth reading my tweet in response to
Mm-hmm.
that. To what I think was a douchey tweet. Was I don't know. So this may just be a maybe a misunderstanding, but
Oh,
what I put was as a libertarian, I never hate libertarians more than on Memorial Day. Making memes insulting better men than you who quote died for the empire and applaud yourself for quote resisting doesn't make you a hero. You don't understand duty because you have no honor. So, no, I mean that I think being a libertarian isn't actually terribly unique in the military, but certainly we're unique libertarians because it's hard to be terribly anti-war when you're in the military.
right.
Yeah.
Clearly, I'm not that anti-war. I mean, I can't be as much as someone who refuses to join. But, for me, this is actually a tough thing because, libertarians, there's like so many different little sects of libertarianism.
And they all hate each other.
Yeah, and like I just said, I hate these guys who say stuff like, you might as well be the Westboro Baptist Church saying something like that on Memorial Day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you think that makes you, like you think you just said something deep and cool and literally pat yourself on the back as being a hero because you resist the empire. Well, yeah, you're resisting the empire, guy. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're using everything we're using, living a normal American life and paying your taxes and just getting bent over a barrel like the rest of us. You know what I mean? Like you're not a freaking hero. So patting your own back. So no, yeah, I didn't appreciate that. And I don't appreciate that about a certain section of libertarians who take the non-aggression principle and anti-interventionism, which I agree with to a degree. And they take it so far as to vilify the men and women who actually serve. And I think that is, and then especially the men and women who died in service on Memorial Day is especially douchey, I think. Sorry, can I swear?
Oh yeah,
no,
yeah,
please, absolutely.
Yeah, we'd be insulted if you didn't.
Okay, good.
And I totally see where you're coming from in response to the meme. And I did go into the article. I read the article that it referenced, and I think that this is one of those things where a meme, of course, gets cut to contextualize. But what I took away from the article was something that is similar. You did a video on YouTube where you talked about the whether criticism is incitement or not, right? That everybody has criticism is an important thing, right? We need criticism, and that's what I took away from this article is that it's not just about the service that our service people provide, but it's also the standpoint that there are those who stand up and fight for the country just as much as they protect the country. from the standpoint of criticizing, from the standpoint of preventing our government from becoming a tyrannical beast. That's
Sure, yeah. I,
and
I actually think, sorry, if you don't mind, I think
no, go ahead.
chiming in on that specifically, I mentioned it in really the only place I've mentioned it is one interview I did with Colin Moriarty. And I mentioned something like this, and we talked about the oath of office, that I mentioned before, the oath that not only do I take, but everyone in Congress, every public official that isn't the president takes the same oath. Every federal government official takes the same oath of office. So a judge or a congressperson, senator, or whatever, they all take the same oath I do. Except, the first words will be like having been appointed as a blank. For me, it's having been appointed as an ensign in the U.S. Navy, and for them, it's having been appointed as a senator or as a United States senator. And then the rest of the oath is the same. But there's an important little part about foreign and domestic, and I think I mentioned to him that I think, and I guess it kind of answers your first question a little bit better. Even is that like why I'm doing the show? Even is when I go out and deploy and go overseas, I'm defending the Constitution from foreign enemies. And I honestly feel like what I'm doing with the show and, what I think so many people are doing, no matter how big time or small time they are, is defending the Constitution from domestic enemies. Now, domestic enemies has that's pretty hard context. Like it's a pretty harsh accusation for people that I disagree with, obviously. You're not an enemy of the Constitution just because you're wrong about what it means. But I will say that if you're the kind of person who just doesn't care what the Constitution says, it's one thing to get it wrong, but there are plenty of people who genuinely don't care. And I think they are my domestic enemy in a sense, but not an enemy in a physical way, an enemy in a war of ideas. And I think there are plenty of people waging that war who aren't in the military. In fact, I'm probably super rare because most people in the military don't think they're allowed to speak their mind or get political. And so we generally don't publicly, like in private we do. But publicly, we don't take public stands. We don't have our own shows and our own stuff, like where we get to vent and talk about failed policy. But so honestly, yeah, the people out there holding the line, in defense of the Constitution are not soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen on the home front. So yeah, I think in the battle of ideas, which is a much more real and visceral, in your face battle that's happening every day than whatever's going on overseas, at least to the average American, it's more visceral and in their face, right?
Absolutely.
That battle is just as important, if not more so. So yeah, I agree with that. You certainly don't have to wear a uniform to support and defend the Constitution. You know what I mean? In fact, I think that's everyone's duty, not just people who've taken an oath. So, well said.
Well, I want to ask you, some questions came to mind while I was watching your videos, and you were talking about the Second Amendment. But I mean, you make it very clear, explaining what well-regulated at the time means and how it breaks down with the preface clause, etc. And but most important to me was your take on the Supreme Court, because you don't agree that the power that they hold is representative of what the Constitution laid out, correct? To make law. And yet at the same time, the Supreme Court has done a very good job of defending the Second Amendment.
Right.
Would you agree on that?
I think it's, credit where credit is due. It's worth saying the good that they've done. But especially when I actually have a whole episode on the Supreme Court, it's worth mentioning that I don't think the best way to go about thinking whether it's good or bad, what the Supreme Court's up to, or anybody in government, whether Congress, president, whatever. I think if we think about outcomes, and that's our only sort of that's our only gauge of how well a government is doing, and the Supreme Court is the government, like make no mistake, they are the federal government. That how good or bad of a job they're doing isn't really the important part to me. I think what we need to do and what the founders did is think in terms of worst case scenario. Like, we need to imagine, and it's something I've mentioned a bunch of times in a bunch of shows, is anytime there's some policy prescription that's being put out there, like, hey, here's a good idea, and the government wants to do it, just ask yourself, what would a tyrant do with this power? Imagine it's not some good guy who has good intentions, but if we accidentally elected Mussolini tomorrow and he became president of the United States, how much power would he have to oppress us? And it's overwhelming, the power he would have to oppress us at that point. Mm-hmm. And that was never supposed to be the point. Trust is the problem. I think Thomas Jefferson, he called it confidence, but it's essentially trust. Mm-hmm. He said confidence is everywhere the parent of despotism, right? That we should not, that it isn't confidence, but jealousy that forms free countries and free constitutions. The people need to be jealous of the power of the government, and we shouldn't give an inch more than what we've spelled out in the Constitution as what belongs to them. And it's not because, name your favorite policy. Like, I don't know, you think we should drive on the left side of the road and you think we should drive on the right side. It's not just winners and losers here. We're talking about they shouldn't have the choice. Like that particular one, sure. But you get my point. Right. The fact that they have the power is the issue. So the Supreme Court may do some things right sometimes, and they do things wrong plenty. Right. But that's not really, to me, that's not the gauge of good government. Good governance is a government that cannot, even if they wanted to, oppress us. And I think the Supreme Court has been one of the most dangerous branches of government, and they were meant to be the most weak and ineffectual. Mm-hmm. And that's clear from the Federalist Papers, and that was clear from just the Constitution itself. It's very obvious. And judicial review, which is the power for them to decide the constitutionality of things, to strike down laws, to effectively make law from the bench, that is not a power delegated to them in the Constitution. It doesn't exist in the Constitution, judicial review. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that's the Supreme Court's job to decide if what Congress just did is constitutional or not. That was never. And if we care about the Constitution and we care about limited government, then we shouldn't let any branch of government, no matter how useful they might be for our particular cause, usurp power that was never granted to them. So I think the Supreme Court can and should make as many rulings as it wants, but it should have no real weight on policy. I think a Supreme Court is supposed to just be the highest appeal. Like, as far as appellate power, they have original jurisdiction over certain types of cases, but over appeals, they're essentially the highest appeal in the land. Like, say you murder somebody.
Exactly.
You get put on death row and you appeal and you appeal and you appeal and appeal. It goes eventually to the Supreme Court if you have some reason. It's meant to be another court. You know what I mean? They're not meant to have the whole idea that their judgments have lasting effects. Instead of imagine if you went to court for murdering someone and you got found guilty, and then they were like, okay, from now on, anyone under these same circumstances is just automatically guilty. They don't have to go to the court again. Right. Precedent was never meant to be a thing with courts, and neither was deciding constitutionality of anything. So they're just supposed to be the highest appeal, and they're supposed to have original jurisdiction over certain types of cases, like, some of these are kind of antiquated, but they have, like when ambassadors are one of the people at fault, or when it's between the states. But then that changed with, I believe, the 11th Amendment. So, they don't have a lot that they do, honestly, that they should be doing. And
but we're stuck with them, right? So,
it also seems like that's largely all the Supreme Court does these days is set precedent.
It's turned into something we just roll the ball down the hill to the Supreme Court instead of fixing stuff and solving problems.
Exactly.
We've decided that every little issue in this country needs to be resolved in Washington. That DC is the place to solve every little issue we could possibly imagine. And we all have to be, every neighborhood has to be exactly the same. We can't be different in Tennessee than we are in California. Heaven forbid we do that. And that it's up to the Supreme Court to be the final arbiters, the final say in what the truth is. And that was never the founders' intention. And that wasn't even really the case for a long time. Even after judicial review was established by Marbury versus Madison, and that was 1803, and that was Chief Justice John Marshall. So one of the early courts established this power, and it's been the case ever since, but they still used it sparingly for a long time. You know, it really got out of control in the 1930s under FDR. He threatened to stack the courts if they shot down his, Social Security laws that he and the Democrats passed, and his, what do you call it? A lot of it was the Social Security Acts was a lot of it. So that's really where the size of government took off, and it was due in large part to compliance by the Supreme Court.
So when it comes to issues like, when we are talking about gun law and a state oversteps constitutionality, if we don't have the Supreme Court to make a determination for the state level, who does that go to? How do we argue that a state is acting unconstitutionally? Who makes that final decision if we don't have them?
Yeah, see, this is a tough one because honestly, the way that the Supreme Court works now is even its supposed final say and all of its authority that it has is completely artificial because they don't have any cops that work for them. They don't have any power to enforce any of their rulings. Like there's underneath judicial review that what makes it work is something called judicial legitimacy, which is it's like Tinkerbell. If you don't believe in it, it doesn't exist, right? Judicial legitimacy is basically the idea that what the Supreme Court says ought to be respected. That is just a philosophy. It isn't binding in any way. In fact, there's been lots of cases in the past where presidents and Congresses in the past have defied the Supreme Court expressly, and there is no consequence because what are they going to do about it? I think it was Andrew Jackson, and I'm pretty sure there were a couple cases where he had run-ins with this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but there was one was Supreme Court said that in the 18-teens that the national bank was constitutional, which is nonsense. It's nowhere in the Constitution. It doesn't say the federal government can do that. It can make a bank, right? So he said it is constitutional. Congress wanted to pass the law, and then he vetoed it anyway on constitutional grounds. He said this is unconstitutional, and it was either this ruling or another one. But he has a famous quote where he says, John Marshall, the Chief Justice, made his ruling. Now let him enforce it. Do something about it. You know what I mean? So that's the fact of the matter. So we have this standard where we just do what the Supreme Court says, but we could have a new standard where we just do what someone else says. But frankly, it's kind of the point in a federalist system is that there is no ultimate authority in any way, that it's a checks and balances thing. And frankly, I don't know what the answer is, except so if the people of California, if those poor bastards, the poor, law-abiding citizen in California who all of a sudden becomes a criminal because his state legislature passed a law that made his gun illegal and said you have to turn it in or you're a criminal. That is obviously unconstitutional. It is, absolutely. And they have their own Supreme Court. Every state has their own Supreme Court. They have lower courts, and it's up to those courts to defend their states and the people of their states and their own constitutions along with the federal constitution, because even state government officials take an oath to support and defend the U.S. Constitution and their state constitution. So, and if you're in a state like California, nobody there is going to stand up for you. No one's going to fight for you. If you're the little guy, if you're in the minority in California and you want to, and your rights are being violated, you're kind of just screwed. But the Supreme Court can certainly make a ruling. They can say, hey, what California did is unconstitutional. And California can even now choose to not obey, right? They don't have to, right? And you see this is currently happening with abortion. And you have all these states, it says that the undue burden, we've set all these precedents with undue burden to the mother and the trimester setup where the third trimester is, you can pass any law you want. and the second trimester only certain laws, and then the first trimester you cannot ban it. And now Alabama just did this thing. They're defying the Supreme Court and daring them to make another ruling, right?
Yeah.
So that's always an option, but there isn't really a good answer, man. I wish there was, but frankly, we get the government we deserve. This is a republic, and it's a federalist system. So different. What can happen is, with checks and balances, the federal government, if we have a federal government that's willing to stand up and say, hey, California, you can't do that. That is violating the rights of your citizens. In fact, the Constitution says that the federal government has to, or that Congress has to, like, one of their duties is to guarantee a Republican form of government in every state. And there's a lot you can read into a Republican form of government.
Right.
That could mean a government with rights and liberty and freedom, and not just you have elections, right? That's not what it means. But you could say one could argue that the federal government has a duty to defend the rights of state citizens from their state government, even before the 14th Amendment. But so you can imagine now this would be Republican Democrat, and I hate this dichotomy and that everything boils down along these lines. But if you had a Republican controlled, House and Senate, even if it wasn't all of them, right? If you could have a federal government that withholds money from California. They say, oh, you're not getting your highway money. We're not giving you this. They have the power of the purse. The Congress does. The president can pull all the damn troops out of California and say, and that's horrible for the local economy, by the way. We live there. We eat food there. We buy groceries. We buy real estate. We live there. Like, okay, now we're all leaving. Like, there's checks and balances for a reason, and it's never supposed to be one final say on anything. And if there's the presidential veto, right? There's government, like the gubernatorial veto. There's all these things that can happen. So it would be tough, but it's not supposed to be easy. And frankly, you can leave. You can move away from California. You can go to a better state, like you can. So the people get the government they deserve. And that's kind of the beauty of federalism, is if you want to vote yourself into a dystopian hellscape in California, you can do that to a degree. But we do need to defend the rights of the individual, even in places like California. So
it becomes a catch-22, right?
Yeah. It's not a great answer, I know, but the Supreme Court, it's a superficial answer anyway. Like, what we currently have is fake. It's all based on a myth that we don't have to believe in. And the moment California says, screw you, Supreme Court, we're going to ban all guns, like it or not, what will the Supreme Court do about it? They can't do anything about it. Now,
right.
And if they had a majority of Democrats in the House, in the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and in the White House, what are they going to do about it? Nothing. They're going to let California get away with it. You know what I mean? So it's all based on judicial legitimacy, which is just a theory.
So if you had to look at the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and determine what you thought, which one you thought was eroding the fastest, what would you answer that with?
10, without a doubt. The 10th Amendment. I think the 10th Amendment is to the Federalists, it wasn't supposed to be necessary, any of the Bill of Rights, because the 10th Amendment is what is putting down in words what the Federalists all assumed, which was that this is an all-inclusive document when it comes to federal power. Like, if it doesn't say you can do it in here, then you can't do it. Everything else is off the table. But then the 10th Amendment states it clearly, that if it's not here, if it's not listed here, then you can't do it. There is no such thing as extra constitutional federal power. There should be no such thing as extra constitutional, authority in the federal government. Everything that isn't specifically spelled out in the Constitution as being a power vested in the federal government should be a state power or an individual power of a person, like the people. So that is the most eroded, and the problem is neither side, left or right, give a crap about the 10th Amendment. They just want their own policies passed, and they'll use whatever power they can to get it done. So that's the one, to me. Now, I think most of them are being eroded quite a bit, but that's the one that I think has the most effect on our everyday lives. It's the reason every problem is solved in Washington. It's the reason that states have no power anymore, and individuals can't just live their lives the way they want to.
Now, see, from my standpoint, I've always, we recently had a gun debate on the show, and one of my arguments with the gun debate was this chicken little idea about gun rights going away. They're coming to take our guns. This has been ongoing since I was a kid. I mean, this isn't like something new. But I would argue that the Second Amendment is actually much stronger than many people think. But the Fourth Amendment, which protects our privacy, I think is absolutely nearly gone completely. I don't know that one really has a leg to stand on anymore. And John knows I talk about this a lot. I believe it is the key to eroding our First Amendment, and is slowly causing a major decline in our First Amendment right to free speech. Any thoughts on that you're allowed to?
Fourth Amendment?
Yeah.
I think when it comes to number 4, I mean, this is one of them that I think has been, it's one that people have tried to fiddle around with the definitions, and this is usually one that I hear, like, people, like, when I say it's not a living document, you can't just interpret it to mean what you want. You got to use the original word, what they meant by the words at the time. Now, this is an example of where we clearly, the fact that it doesn't say computers doesn't mean computers aren't protected.
Right.
And that isn't originalism versus, loose construction or something. It is, like Jefferson said, carry yourself back to the time that it was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying to invent some meaning, go with the probable one. And if computers existed, they clearly would have said, yes, those are also protected. That isn't even conjecture. It's completely in the spirit of what they're saying here, would protect a computer or your cell phone or whatever. It just didn't exist. That's not the point, of what's called strict constructionism, right? Like a strict constructionist says that the original intent is king. That's what matters, right? So all that said, because that's just like a talking point. Sometimes I get back like, well, like you can't. We always interpret the Constitution to mean stuff that they didn't mean at the time, but it's not what they're doing. So it's completely in keeping with what they meant. So I think this is one of those issues that most people are blind to, and I think when we talk about WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, all this stuff. I mean, I'm not going to pick a side here, but when they exposed how much spying the government had been doing, the NSA had been doing, at the time, I think that was a huge moment for our country, and I think we just totally failed as a citizenry. I've never been more disappointed in the American people than it was a complete lack of outrage. I think that we let it pass. Like, there was some outrage at the time, you know what I mean? But we kind of let it pass, and now people just kind of accept it, you know what I mean? Like, we accept that we're kind of getting watched, or that someone's, keeping an eye on us. And it's like the price we pay for civilization. It's almost like roads now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm disappointed with the American people as a whole for this not being like the defining issue that we all get behind and like vote out everyone who was responsible and replace them all. Like, how do we not do that? So that's like, that should have been a huge wake up call for civil liberties, and it wasn't. And it certainly helped make the Tea Party movement a thing, and it got some momentum, but it's already forgotten. And I think stuff like that is a huge part of how, like, Rand Paul kind of made a name for himself, like filibustering stuff, and that like everybody, Republican and Democrat, were all willing to pass, and he was standing up and stuff. So he made a name for himself, and a few others like him, standing up for stuff like this. And this kind of stuff has become like a kooky outlier thing. Like, you're a weirdo if you care about this stuff, and it's like the most important stuff. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's like, who cares if we spend a couple million more bucks on the Special Olympics? Like, this matters more. You know what I mean? That gets everybody all fired up. But this, it couldn't keep our attention for more than, a few months. So,
and that is the bigger concern, right? What are we willing to lay down and accept in the present day, from our government, from those who represent us? John, I mean, how do you feel affected by, like, ultimately a lack of privacy? I mean, how much does it impact you, or how much do you ever think about it?
I don't really think about it all that much. Like, it really hasn't, as far as I know, hasn't impacted me. I probably have a file somewhere with my name on it. I don't know, but I mean, I don't say anything ridiculous or do anything ridiculous, so I don't know. But I'm certainly against it, right?
I think you're safe as long as you wear those glasses. Nobody can tell who you are.
Right.
So.
No one can find me, and the beard that helps too. Kind of breaks up the profile.
Yeah.
But that opinion in and of itself speaks to that apathy that we have in this country about it. Well, I'm not walking through the airport talking about bombs,
Well, no,
so
I mean,
I'm not
I
on
would
their
say,
radar, so it's not that big. I mean, I'm
well,
not
no. I
pointing
wouldn't
you
say
out.
apathy. Right. That's something. I wouldn't say apathy. I would say more helplessness.
Oh, okay.
There's really
Well,
nothing I can do about it, right?
I
I
could see
mean,
that.
Yeah.
nothing I personally, at least. I mean, I can join a movement or something that and I would be happy to. But yeah, with
That's
myself, there's
honestly
not.
fair. It does feel helpless sometimes. Like, oh, we're fucked. What else is new?
Yeah. What is it this time?
So
It's hard not to fall into that.
I mean,
Yeah.
and we're still. I mean, unfortunately, we're still at this point though where we look at this and we say, okay, well, if we take something like the Patriot Act and we think that this wasn't representative of the will of the people, even though this is legislation that was put into place, right? These are things now. It exists. The vote is all we have at our disposal. The vote is all we have. But that same feeling of helplessness that we feel about other things factors into the vote as well. I mean, there's so many people that feel helpless there.
Yeah.
Is the vote, as I don't know? What do you think, Michael? Is the vote everything it used to be?
I feel like it's kind of funny because the vote was never actually, on the federal level, a very important thing, except for in the House of Representatives. So in the original Constitution, the people voted for the House of Representatives. Like, that's it. The senators were picked by your state legislature, and the Electoral College picked the president. And like, I actually plan on doing an entire episode about the Electoral College, but what I've seen in my studies so far is that voting in the presidential election was so unimportant to the founders and to not just the founding fathers, but not just the framers, but all of our founding fathers, meaning every American in early America. It really wasn't that important because in the 1796 election, which was the first real contested election, George Washington wasn't running again. So it was, it was the first one. I mean, he won unanimously. So it wasn't even a contest. So the first real contest, so in 1796, I believe there were 17 states or 18 in the Union at that point. I think 17. And only 8 even had elections.
Wow.
Only 8 even if you were a citizen of 9 states, there was no such thing as a presidential popular vote. You didn't go vote at a voting booth.
Wow.
It is a state power. Like the purpose of the fundamental purpose of the Electoral College is it's a state check on federal power, as was the Senate, right? So your state legislature and along with your governor voted and decided, democratically, because they are picked, through elections, right? So elections always mattered, but you only voted for your state representatives, your local representatives, and your member of your House district, U.S. House of Representatives. You didn't vote for anyone else. So 8 states had a popular vote at all. That doesn't mean that they gave the electoral votes to whoever won. That doesn't mean that. So in the 9 states that didn't vote or whatever. So every state gets to decide, even now, how they give their electoral votes. Nothing in the Constitution says how they have to give them. It's just that, I don't know, Kentucky, you get this many votes. Do with them what you will. It's up to Kentucky. You know what I mean? And this is a state power. This is a separation of powers. The states pick the president, not the people, not the House, not the Senate. The states is its own entity that's a separate check and balance on all the other things, on the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the people. So at the time, it could be the governor just picks who they go to, right? It could be that the governor picks the electors. It could be the state legislature votes on who the electors go to. It could be that they have a popular vote within their state, and whoever wins 50%, they give all their electors to that guy. They could give proportional electors. So if you get 30% of the vote, of the popular vote, you get 30% of the electors. Every state gets to decide. And at somewhere along the line, for the sake of basically when Democrats and Republicans, this is how they got their chokehold on the American political system. And this is why half of people don't vote more than half don't vote.
Yeah.
Because they're not Democrats and they're not Republicans, and that's your only choice. Mm-hmm. So they got this stranglehold with the winner take all system. So they convinced all but 2 states that whoever gets 50% plus one of the votes in your state gets all of your electoral votes. If 49.9% of people who vote in California vote for a Republican, they get 0 electoral votes.
Yeah.
Right. So for anyone who cries democracy, whatever, that's also not fair. But the point is that it's not a right of the people to pick the president, and it never was. It's a state right. And states have so few rights left that I don't want to get rid of any of them. And so with the 13, 14, 15, 17th Amendment, we turned the senators into, now they're selected by the people. They were selected by the legislature of the state. So, the Tennessee legislature picked the Tennessee senators. And that was a state right as well. So my point with all this is that the vote was never really that important to the founders, and it gradually became more important as time went on. Obviously, it's not that it wasn't important, because you got to vote in state elections and local elections. And back then, your state had more power, so it mattered. Your local elections mattered more. Your state elections mattered more. Now they don't matter at all, and nobody votes at all in those because they're weak. They're neutered. They have no power, the states, right? Like, what are they going to do? Like, they're going to talk about what day your garbage gets taken out. They were supposed to talk about everything in your life, except for war and treaties and trade. Like, they covered every other aspect of your life with state and local. So it mattered greatly, the vote, right? But I think when people say the vote these days, we're mostly talking about the president. So that's one thing. It's turned into, we mostly think about presidential elections when we think about changing the country and changing the world. It's about who we vote for, the giant douche or the turd sandwich, right? It's always cute, and they're always, not our best and brightest.
Yeah, see, and that's a shame, because whenever I think about the vote, I'm like, okay, how can we change? I'm looking for elections that swing the mindset in Washington. That we're going to have that point where we hopefully get a fresh wash of new blood, because the business as usual that goes on in Washington has really stagnated the system. But the question becomes, what's it going to take? Now on the Electoral College, I question how capable we would be of making a change in the Electoral College versus how we do it now. I notice on Twitter, I'll point this out, while you have no stake in the Democratic race at this time, you did give a hear to Andrew Yang when he talked about apportioning the votes, much like you said, for the Electoral College, as opposed to a winner take all. So is that mindset, is that something that's possible with what we have now? I mean, would it work?
Oh, I think it would work. I think it helps having a pretty prominent, not like huge, but he's not doing bad, presidential candidate. Saying that is a big step in the right direction, I think. We need more people who matter saying it, and that's the only way to convince more people. But all anyone hears is, how is abolish the Electoral College, abolish it, democracy. And if you truly care about more proportional representation, which I do, that's fair. It's not great when there's a huge disparity in the people's vote and the states and the electoral votes, but I still think it's like the last bastion of states' rights, and I'm not interested in taking that away from the states. So something like that would be more democratic, even though I really don't like the word democracy or democratic when we're talking about the United States, because we're not a democracy, and it's not just a silly little civics 101 talking point.
Right.
It's an important distinction. People use the word democracy on purpose. We made a whole party in the U.S. called the Democrats for the very purpose of trying to convince people that your government doesn't represent you, the people, and in a sense, it's only supposed to indirectly represent us. It's not the will of the people is one of many checks in this federalist system, right? The people aren't the ultimate authority, and neither we are, in that we can, we can overthrow the government at any point, and that's always a thing, right? And that's what happened with the first revolution, right? But that's one thing we always have is numbers, right? We are the many and they are the few. So that's always a check on, it should be anyway, and they push their boundaries, right? But that's always meant to be a check on the ambitions of the government. But we're a republic. It's an important distinction because we're only majoritarian sometimes, and that's the way it was supposed to be, because the majority can tyrannize the rest of us just like anybody else.
Right.
And we don't want that. The individual is key. The individual is king, really. Like, the sovereignty of state and the sovereignty of the individual are like non-negotiable, and no majority can change that.
Right.
Well, a super majority of 75% could perhaps change that, but that's pretty hard to do, right? It shouldn't be majoritarianism. And people who think they believe in majoritarianism, which is what they're talking about when they cry democracy, when they're bitching about our system, what they really want is just to get their own way. If it was the other way around, they would not be it's not a principled stand. It's a consequentialist stand.
It's a convenience.
They lost the election, so they're pissed. You know what I mean? That's it. And if we really want to talk democracy, how about the fact that, of all the people who can vote in this country, like 40% voted. And so of the 40%, 40 to 45% that voted, who could vote, about half-ish voted for Hillary Clinton, and about half-ish voted for President Trump. So we're talking about 20% of voting age people voted for Hillary Clinton. Do you think that's democracy, that she wins? 80% didn't want her to be president. Now, 80% didn't want Trump to be president either. What does that say about democracy? How is that the will of the people? And then they'll come back with oh, well, it's their fault. They didn't try. It's like they didn't try because it's rigged, because they don't want either of these people. Why would it's like, okay, I hate this guy, I hate her, so why am I going to compromise any of my values for one of these guys? It's like the system is set up like this, and that, I think maybe just not caring or bad education might be the cause for many of those people not voting. But I completely understand why people don't vote on principle, because because you lose. You lose no matter what. It's a lose-lose. So why even try? You know what I mean? But obviously, if we can get those 80% to get on the same page, they could have all the power in the world, right? But so anyway, that's not democracy when 80% of the people didn't want someone to be president and they become president, right? So it's like they don't even understand what they're asking for, and how it doesn't even fulfill what they think is some first principle of theirs about majoritarianism. But man, this is probably I've gone so far off the original. You're what do I think of the vote? Is that right? What started? Or we were talking about the Electoral College, but my point, I think it's a good compromise. We could get closer to parity with the popular vote without stripping states of one of the last bastions of their own power that they have left. You know what I mean?
Well,
And yeah,
do you, when we talk about states' rights and their level of power, and we'll look at this in comparison to, say, the executive branch and what many there's arguments about the overreach of power from the executive branch, but from a state level. So take California. If they say we don't include Donald Trump on the ballot if he doesn't release X tax returns, financial documents, is that
yeah.
overreach on the state's part?
I think constitutionally speaking, no, because it is California can just pick a president. They don't even need an election. Like I said, they don't have to. Now, they might be violating their own law because they pass laws about elections and they have rules. So, and it would take a majority of their legislature and their governor. Now, the consequences for clearly authoritarian acts on levels like that are supposed to be things like reprisals from the federal government, from the other branches of government, from the people themselves, from the other states. It could be, you know what I mean? So now it just so happens that California will never give an electoral vote to Donald Trump anyway, even if even if they do vote.
Understandable.
So it doesn't have a real consequence now. But imagine a state, they did the opposite and said, or if it was like Tennessee did that instead, right? I'm sure the Supreme Court would say something. They would give some opinion. They would pull some bull crap out of their asses that has nothing to do with the Constitution and say that the Constitution says this or that, or whatnot. But frankly, it's up to Tennessee. It's up to California, and I think that might be the best thing that can happen. To be honest, what we need is for the 48 states who do winner take all. And they're doing it out of service to the Republican and Democrat parties. That's the only reason that's a thing. They've guaranteed it's a thing because they own every state legislature, every governor, every freaking local election in this whole country is Republicans and Democrats. And the duopoly is the most important thing to hold on to for them. So they guarantee that with the electoral, with the winner-take-all system. Because imagine if Gary Johnson could take, if he got 10% of the vote, if he got 10% of the damn electoral votes, and you can't get to 270, then that means the House of Representatives picks our president, right?
Yeah.
Or Gary Johnson could be like, okay, you make me vice president, and I'll have my electors vote for you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, not that they have to do what he says, but they're his electors, kind of. So all these compromises can happen, and I think that would be wonderful. I would love to see that. I would love for this whole thing to crumble and fall apart, and then we can try again with something new. You know what I mean? There are constitutional remedies for any of these things happening that are fine. It won't be the end of the world. I would love for Congress to pick our next president. I mean, I don't care who it is. Just the fact that it happened would be a huge, just F you to the establishment. You know what I mean? To the status quo. We're sick of this. Two horrible choices that you keep giving us every 4 years. You know what I mean? I think it might be the best thing ever if we get that kind of blatant, authoritarian sort of anti-Republican in the small r, right? And big R, but small r on principle. If we get some of these authoritarian states who are already authoritarian to show their true colors, might be the best thing for this country. If we can see it for what it is and see that they don't care about democracy. They just want to win. It's just like it's dirty. It's gross. And we can see how gross it is. So I'm all for it. I said, go for it. Again, it's just a symbolic gesture at this point because he won't get any of their votes anyway.
Right.
Well, do you think that with, how old are you? Let me preface with, how old are you?
30.
30. Okay. So with your generation and the generation after you, this sense of helplessness that John mentioned earlier, which many people feel whenever it comes down, when we talk about voting, because of course, like you said, most people boil it down to who we are voting for president. A lot of people just
Hmm.
skip the midterm elections, right? They don't even pay attention to it.
Yeah, or their state.
Yeah, not to mention local elections.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it? Do you feel that there's enough helplessness that it's creating inactivity from a political standpoint in the younger generations?
I think there's a couple. There's a more cynical way to look at it and a more optimistic way, and I kind of felt more hopeless. I voted in 2016 for the first time. I never voted, and it was for that very reason. I thought, okay, I'm screwed either way, so why play? You know what I mean? I don't want to play this game. Like, there's no point. So I was one of those people, and that hasn't changed. It's still totally true, but it was pretty symbolic. I voted third party. I voted in the Republican primary, but my guy didn't win. And then, I voted in the general election. I voted for Gary Johnson.
Yeah.
Symbolic, but there was some hope there during that election. They talked about, like, if he was polling high enough, he could get on the election stage, on the debate stage, right? Like it's the same like happened with Ross Perot back in like 92 or something. 90,
Yeah.
92. Yeah, I think. Where he actually was on the stage as a third party because he had enough of a vote, and whatever bullcrap rules they have that make it only Democrats and Republicans. One of the rules is like what you're polling at to get on the debate stage, and that's not even a law. That's like a rule. That's the media rule, right?
Absolutely horrible.
Yeah, and the media decides who our president is, basically. So I think the hopelessness is very real. 2016 gave me a lot of hope, actually. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't. I'm not. I like a lot of the stuff he's done. I don't like a lot of the stuff he says. I think he's done some stuff I disagree with, and I've have some episodes where I call it out, but I got to choose my words and whatnot. But
yeah.
But I think he's been a better commander in chief than President Obama was. As I was in the military for both. Everybody, like the military in general, was pretty excited. Not that we all voted for him or anything like that. But I mean, when we're thinking about how much money we're going to get, and whether we're going to run out of pencils and have to wait like 2 months to get new pencils, you know what I mean? Like that's the kind of crap that's downstream of budget cuts, right? So,
right.
We don't pull people out of damn countries. We keep them there, and we all get less pencils, right? Or whatever. So we don't have enough fuel. We don't have enough, bullets for whatever we're trying to do. It's not. We're trying to do more with less. It's not that we actually cut anything back, right? We're still doing all the same stuff. So anyway. People were excited about that, and they literally preached that. My graduation from the Naval Academy was 2015. So Joe Biden actually spoke at my graduation. He touched me in the hand with his hand. So we shook hands.
Did you feel violated?
Yeah. Did he whisper sweet nothings into your ear?
Yeah, me too. Me too. But no, anyway, no, it was perfectly fine. Sure. It was actually a good speech. I wasn't a fan, but it was a good speech. But I saw Mike Pence talking at a commencement ceremony for the Naval Academy a few years later, and he was talking about this, like the days of belt tightening are in the past. You're going to get everything you need, and so people were excited about that. We'll get the training and the supplies that we need, but also it feels like the military kind of became this social experiment under Obama. Everything was about social experiments. It was like women doing this and transgender people doing that and all this stuff. And it's like, all that is fine, but we are downstream of culture. We can't be like the trendsetters in culture. We're just people like everyone else. And a place where our job is to fight and win wars. It's not really that important how everyone feels. You know what I mean? If your
Yeah.
feelings really aren't that important,
They're
and
kind of a distraction, right?
yeah,
Right.
all of our decisions, and General Mattis said this, but that's why we were super excited when he got picked for Secretary of Defense, and why we're all so heartbroken that he's not Secretary of Defense anymore.
Yeah.
Was he said this even before that when he was general, and then while he was just in between, he was writing books and doing stuff, and then he talked about when he was in the office that like decisions in the military like need to have pretty much one thing at the core of the decision, and that is lethality. Is this decision going to make us better or worse at winning wars? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about, transgender policy or women in combat, these are things that are very taboo and they're very touchy subjects, and there's good arguments, right, about all of this. But are we more deadly as a fighting force or less deadly when women are in combat or when transgender people are, serving, right? Now, that's the important question, not the ethical, that's not fair. You know what I mean?
It's right.
Now, that when you ask that question about black people or, women on freaking surface ships or whatever, or women in the military in general, it's like, yes, of course, integrating black people with white people is going to make us a more effective, deadly fighting force. We're going to be first of all, we'll just be a better team. We're all going to be one team. You know what I mean? There's a million ways to do that. But women in combat is for all the things that matter in that conversation, what he says, the most important thing is, are we more or less lethal? You know what I mean? As a force, and if the answer is less, then obviously we shouldn't be doing it. And if the answer is we stay the same, then it's like, okay, maybe we do it, maybe we don't. And that's so. God, why am I talking about this? How did I get here? Well, where do we start? God, I
don't know. We were talking about macaroni and cheese, and we were talking about transgenders, and I don't know.
I'll keep it simple. Craft macaroni. Seriously, where did that come from?
I don't remember. I was so enthralled with what you were saying. I have no idea.
Right? You were lulled by the conversation.
Yeah, I was.
John. You were taking it. It was wow, you took
you really
took me down a path too. Wow, I'm supposed to be the one staying on topic, and you took
right.
You talked about my generation, and we talked about hopelessness and voting, and
yeah.
Trump. God, okay. Can I? I'm going to finish this thought. Sorry.
Okay.
It started with I said I got a lot of hope in 2016. And then tangent after tangent took me off so far off that path, right? I didn't vote for Trump. All that, I'm not his biggest fan. I wish he would do things differently a lot of times. That said, I was so pumped on election night when he won. And the reason is because he wasn't supposed to win. And to the people who say, this is rigged, this whole thing is dumb, I get two horrible choices, and why even try? I lose no matter what. But then we could see that everyone, the media, every establishment politician, not only wanted Hillary Clinton to win, but expected her to win. And for so long, pretty much the media decides who our president is. Polling is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I hate it. I wish polling didn't exist. I wish nobody knew. I wish every election happened simultaneously in every state. Yeah. You couldn't see what California did already when it's time for you to go vote. Mm-hmm. Same freaking moment, is when they send in the tallies. They send it all in at the same time. No polling. We just go vote your conscience. You know what I mean? But anyways, they basically manipulate us into picking somebody. And they tried so hard to make us pick Clinton. Mm-hmm. And he had a 10% chance of winning or something. And as the night went on, she got up to 98%. And obviously, or 97%, right? But it's that's not how statistics work. 8% is still 8%. That's not zero. You know what I mean? That means you could win, and he did win, right? Mm-hmm. But it's it was such a big fuck you. You know what I mean? From the people to the establishment. And I love that. I was like, yeah, fuck you. You know what I mean? Fuck you, CNN. Fuck you, the media. Fuck you, establishment. So even though I didn't vote for him, I loved that. So I have this sense of hope. I thought Like when we see the social justice warriors marching around campus, you know, and I'm like, that's so dumb. That doesn't make any sense. Like whatever they're talking about, and it seems so common sense to me. And I felt like I'm the asshole. I'm like the one in a million. They're the majority, and I'm the minority who has like, this is just the way of the world now. Like their utopia will be a thing. Socialism, yep, just it's happening. You know, nothing I can do. And then that giant fuck you made me realize that, oh, it's not just me. I'm not the only one who's sick of being called a bigot for being a constitutionalist and wanting liberty and freedom for everybody. You know, I'm not the only one who's sick of it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who are sick of this. And that was the hopeful moment for me. And I don't know if it's going to carry on to 2020. I hope it continues. But
yeah.
And
I think
that's what I was going to ask is, you know, I mean, so is that going to impact your vote in 2020, your impetus to vote, and not just for the president? Because I think the important thing here is, you know, we have to focus on our representatives. You know, this is what people need to do from a state level, is really determine whether or not their representatives are actually representing them. Because that's where our changes need to happen. That's where it can happen, is when we change representatives, when we put the right people in. So do you have more impetus in 2020 at this point?
Yeah. Well, I feel, I don't know how I'm going to vote, but I feel more inclined in 2020 to vote for Trump than I did in 2016. Not saying I will.
Same with me too.
I know that if any Democratic president who's currently running is on the ticket against Trump, and barring Trump doing something horrible between now and then, not just saying something horrible, that's just part of it, right? But doing something horrible, then I could change my mind. But if I change my mind, I don't see it to be voting for one of them. I don't think. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't. So I don't know who I'm picking. I'm inclined to not pick Trump. I'm inclined to not pick any of the Democrats. So I may not vote, or I may vote third party. But it kind of depends what's at stake, I suppose. And it feels like a lot's at stake. And that's why I'm like, you know, I consider voting for Trump, because it seems like there's a lot at stake. But I kind of felt from 2016 that was kind of big for the Libertarian Party. It wasn't, you know, the polls were really good, and then people just kind of back out on election day. And I'm not a Libertarian Party member, and I don't even like the Libertarian Party, to be honest. I like libertarianism. Mm-hmm. I don't like the party a lot.
I say the same thing, yeah.
Right. So, you know, I voted for Gary Johnson, and I read an article that made it was kind of convincing that if we get enough of this like pissed off attitude that people seem to have last time, you know, that got Trump elected, we get enough of that, and we get enough people that decide everyone sucks, I'm voting third party. I really think it's possible that in 2024, maybe at best case, maybe 2028, maybe later, we could maybe get just one damn electoral vote for a third party. If we can do that, I think that'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Mm-hmm. And I want to see the camel's back break. I'm tired of this two-party system. Now, the camel's back isn't the government or the system itself. It is the two-party stranglehold. That's what I want to see completely go away, right? So it doesn't take that much, right? First of all, there's a couple states that they give, it's like Oklahoma, Nebraska. I think Nebraska and Maine, or one of the New England ones. It's Maine or New Hampshire, or one or the other. And then I think it's Maine. And then I think Nebraska, that give like whoever wins the popular vote gets like one elector, and then the other two are split. Like they have like two districts that if you win this district, you get that vote. If you win this district, you get that vote. Right. So you could get all three, or you could just get two, or one, right? But that's for like Nebraska. But anyways, if we can just get one damn electoral vote, then I think that could do it. And he was pretty high this last time, Gary Johnson, but he was polling much higher, and that was really promising. So I kind of want to keep pushing that. I don't want to abandon that. You know what I mean? And it's not for the Libertarian Party's sake. It's for the anti-Democrat Republican sake. You know what I mean? To get rid of that duopoly sake, I'll vote freaking green if I have to like, to get another person to get an electoral vote, another party. So, I kind of want to see that happen. And I hope the same sort of now disgust for politics that I think grew a lot in 2016. I think people are a lot of moderate Democrats, which is the majority of them, cannot be happy with this group of candidates they've gotten for president. I think the extreme people are pretty happy with their choices, right? The far left people. But then Joe Biden might ruin all of that because he's going to suck up all the moderates. If he makes it to the general election, he'll suck up all the moderates and none of them are going to vote for third party. But if we get some extreme lefty, we can get a lot of more moderates voting third party. So that would be like best case for me. So depending on how things are going, and if there seems to be an unhappy middle that seems willing to vote third party, then I think I'll join them and vote third party. And if I have to vote for the Republican or the Democrat, I don't know what I'll do. I might just not vote.
Well, I think there's a mindset in this country that has been developing over the years, and I think 2016 exacerbated it. This mindset that many people expressed that voters who didn't make a choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and voted third party or didn't vote one way or the other, they did a disservice because they didn't attempt to keep the worst person out of office by voting for the opposite candidate, right? This mindset that, okay, you don't want either one of them in, but you need to vote for the lesser of two evils so we prevent the evil one from taking power, whichever side that might be, right? How can you break that mindset that has taken root in this country?
Yeah, I on the one hand, you can't really blame people for thinking in those terms. It's kind of just like another reaction instead of hopelessness. It's both cases are accepting the shitty reality, and in one case, you try and make the most of it or the least bad of it by picking the lesser of two evils. I think the difference is you have another group of people. You have a group of people who accept the reality that nobody's great, and then think of what they can do to help is, vote against somebody and not for somebody, essentially. And then there's another group of people who find the very fact that we have to pick the lesser of two evils to be the problem itself. You know what I mean?
Right.
And those are the people that choose not to vote or vote third party, right? So I get where they're coming from. You know what I mean? I was pretty terrified of the Hillary Clinton presidency. I was, but that wasn't enough for me to go vote Republican, on principle. I think principles are more important than policy. They're more important than consequences. I think that more people should think that in those terms, and then I think the consequences will take care of themselves. But that's not going to fix anything. That's what I think their problem is, and I think if they can realize, like they're halfway there. They already realize that they're screwed. You know what I mean? They already realize that they have to choose the lesser of two evils. You know what I mean? That's like step one. It's like halfway there. We just now need to get them to the point where it's like, okay, now doesn't that suck? Shouldn't we try and change that? How are we going to change that? It's not by voting for the lesser of two evils. Right. It's throwing off the whole system. So I don't know if it's doable because I think if we convince the 60% that don't vote, 55, 60% that don't vote, they're clearly already mostly disheartened about politics. If we can convince enough of them to be like, hey, take that lack of hope and send it to some third party. Let's bring it all down. Let's bring down this two-party system. That might be a more fruitful endeavor than actually trying to convince Democrats to vote third party or convince Republicans to vote third party. You know what I mean? Exactly. Might get some, but it's the people who, they're not politically active because of the Democrats and Republicans. We got to convince them that they all feel alone, but they're not alone. There's 60% of us, you know what I mean? And but we're not a group. We're not an affiliated party of unhappy people. The unhappy party, like we just make a new party and everyone's invited except Democrats and Republicans, like just the unhappy party. Vote any way you want to.
Right.
There's third party.
Just vote.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a final question for you. In looking at your channel, you don't just specifically stick to the Constitution. You do talk about some issues here and there, or write articles about issues. As we get closer to 2020, do you see yourself becoming more involved in the conversation gearing towards the election, as far as from the standpoint of the Electoral College, standpoint of voting and what we as citizens have a responsibility to do? Do you see yourself taking any avenues in that direction?
Yeah. So elections are tough. I mean, last year there was elections, and I had just started the podcast, but people don't care as much. It's not as big. I voted for my, House and Senate members and my state and local folks. But this is actually explicitly off limits in the military. Like I said, I can cover my ass, but with that disclaimer. But what I cannot do, even with a disclaimer, is endorse any candidate or party. That doesn't mean I can't criticize the hell out of all of them, but and I can criticize them, disproportionately even. But because and praise is not the same as endorsement. I can say someone did something good or a party did something right.
Right.
But I can certainly say who I voted for in the past. But if I come out and say, vote for this guy in 2020, that is explicitly off limits.
Now, could you say something like, I plan on voting for so-and-so without encouraging others to do that? Or is that kind of a...
I'm sure I could. Part of me would rather just be safe and not
absolutely
do that. And then another part of me is like, I don't know if I'm ever going to know who I'm going to vote for until I'm literally voting. Like, I'm going to be like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, so I couldn't even tell you,
right.
Maybe. So
Fair
we'll see. We'll see. But so I haven't had to deal with this yet. Since I've gotten into, this podcasting thing and my opinions are out there, I haven't done this during a presidential election. And I have spent some time so far kind of criticizing some of the Democratic candidates and President Trump for things they say, policies they propose, but never personal attacks and never disrespect. And that's the line as far as that goes. But I certainly can't endorse any of them. And so that's a line I'll have to walk. I think it would be a good time, and I think it'd be a good time to talk about the Electoral College because everyone's interested. It'd be a good time to talk about voting rights, because I haven't done an episode about voting rights. I've mentioned it in passing here and there. So yeah, I think there's some good. It'll be constitutional, but it'll be relevant to what's going on. You know what I mean? And I think even the stuff I've done that's a little extra constitutional it's only been a few, and I for the longest time I wasn't doing that, but then I kind of decided I wanted to be more. I wanted to get. I felt like I was missing controversies, and I was missing the hot topic because I was working on something else.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I still have on the back burner these like kind of longer form shows about particular parts of the Constitution, but then I want to get these like I call it gut reaction. These like shorter videos that are more like kind of off the cuff, not as detailed, researched, but still try and argued well, but it's not as deep. So those have been less constitutional, but usually there's still some you can trace it back a little, like eventually to the Constitution somehow. But yeah, I think that'd be a good time the next year or so to talk about Electoral College, voting rights, suffrage. Certainly that's important. There's like 5 or 6 amendments in the Constitution that have to deal with voting, because in the original Constitution they didn't say anything about voting, right? They just said the people choose the House of Representatives. Boom, didn't say anything about voting. Basically said your state decides who gets to vote, and then so that was you could say that was a mistake, and it took 6 amendments to rectify that mistake. And so that'll be a great thing to go through the different amendments that have gotten universal suffrage to where it is now. That eventually, black men, and then women, and then 18-year-olds, and then people in DC. All this stuff. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that'll be like kind of election related, but I can't just come out and
of course,
be like, yeah. And sometimes I wish I could, you know what I mean?
Sure. But I think I think the more important thing is that if there are people out there that understand it and can educate people, because it is important to vote. I mean, we have a system where it's important to vote. People need to exercise their right to vote, but it's fundamentally important that they understand why they're voting and what they're voting for. This is where I think we really get washed away in having any understanding of exactly what we're voting for. I mean, the lawyers speak in a ballot is crazy, right?
Yeah.
That being said, Michael, it's been awesome having you on here.
Absolutely.
You are quite impressive with with the way you present your knowledge of the Constitution. I have to say I'm impressed that that you say you've only been doing this for really looking at this for like the last year, because I have to admit I've listened to some people who claim to be historians on the Constitution and this, that, and the other who really sound like they're talking in a vacuum most of the time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That's really nice.
Absolutely.
It means a lot.
So, as I said earlier, folks, Michael has got Unalienable, which is on YouTube. That's his channel on YouTube. You can find him on Twitter, and you can also find him on Facebook. If you look down below, I've included all of the links, all the relevant links to find Michael. And I strongly recommend that you get on and listen to what he has to say. I never once questioned whether or not I was listening to fake news. Which was great. I was really surprised, right? That there was so many salient things that he had to say that were really on key. So, Michael, thank you very much for being here. If you would, John, where can they find us if they're looking for us?
You can find us on Twitter at the GenGapP. You can find us in our Discord server, which is linked down below. And while you're on your way down there, you can go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you haven't. And we'll see you over there.
And Michael, I'm going to let you go out with the last word. I will say this, since you're on the Discord channel, we may dub you the official go-to constitutional tiebreaker. You could act as our Supreme Court, as it were.
You'll be our caller friend.
Right.
Call me the tyrant.
Let's go to Morty's and see what the ruling is on this. But Michael, if you want to just say anything on your way out the door, again, we appreciate you being here, and take us home if you don't mind.
All right. Thank you both so much for having me. This was a delight. I've only done a couple of these, and I always really like it. One thing I miss in my monologue is, back and forth conversation with people, and I really enjoy it. So thanks for having me. Let me know if you ever want to do it again. And just FYI, anybody listening, if you listen to podcasts on audio platforms, I'm on pretty much any platform. I've tried to get them all: iTunes, Stitcher, all those as well. It's all obviously just audio, but half my videos are just audio anyway until lately. So you can find me pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. So that's all I got.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, guys. We're going to roll out of here. Hit that like, hit that subscribe if you like what you're hearing. And we will see you guys on Friday at 8:30 for our regular Friday episode.
That's right. We'll see you then.
Peace out.